I still remember the exact moment it happened. I was standing at my daughter's wedding, watching her step into this glittering new life, when I caught her voice carrying across the room. She was laughing with her new in-laws, polished and perfect. And then the words slipped out sharp enough to slice right through me. She called me a failure. For a second. The music faded, the chatter blurred, and I felt myself shrink inside my own skin. I'm Evelyn Parker. I've lived a life that may look simple compared to the chandeliers and champagne around me, but I never thought my own child would measure me by the weight of my wallet or the shine of my shoes. That night, hidden under the silk folds of my dress, I carried something no one else knew about, a letter from Tom, my late husband. His words had been sealed for years, waiting for the right moment, and as my daughter's laughter turned into something that cut, I knew the moment was drawing closer. Because Tom had made me promise one last promise that I couldn't ignore. The Hale estate looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers glowed above tables draped in ivory linen. Pearls glimmered at women's throats. Diamonds caught the light as champagne flutes clinked, and every laugh seemed to carry the effortless ease of people who had never worried about bills or late shifts. Even the air smelled expensive roses, polished wood, and the faint sweetness of champagne spilling onto marble. I stood there in my best dress, the one I had worn only twice before, knowing it looked plain beside the gowns sweeping the floor around me. For decades, I worked quietly at the library, shelving books, answering questions, stretching every paycheck to give Lena opportunities I never had. Every choice, every sacrifice, was for her. And here she was, glowing in her gown, a part of this glittering world I had never touched. It should have been a proud moment. But then I heard it. My daughter's voice, light and careless, drifting back toward me. I caught only a few words, but they were enough to make my chest tighten and the room blur. She was dismissing me, framing me as someone who had failed, who never achieved, who didn't belong in this world of grandeur. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was betrayal, a wound I hadn't expected from the very person I gave everything to. And in that moment, beneath the hurt, something inside me hardened. The music began, soft and familiar, and for a moment, my breath caught. It was Tom's favorite song, the one he always said he would dance to with Lena on her wedding day. But when the father-daughter dance started, there was no father, only a framed photo resting on a chair draped in white, sitting lonely at the edge of the dance floor. Guests clapped politely, but to me, that chair was heavier than the chandelier above. It carried the silence of everything he would never see. I remembered his last days, the way his hand trembled as he pressed an envelope into mine. He had told me it was not for birthdays or holidays, not even for graduations. It was only for the moment when Lena turned her back on me, when her respect faltered so badly that I needed strength he could no longer give. I had promised him I would honor his wish, though I prayed that moment would never come. Yet as I stood in that glittering hall, hearing my daughter's careless words echoing in my mind, I felt the truth press against me. This was what Tom had seen coming. The grief of his absence sat heavy in my chest, but beneath it, a new resolve stirred. That letter was no weapon, it was his way of reminding me of my worth. And now, for the first time, I felt the weight of using it. Lena stood at the center of the reception, radiant beneath the chandeliers. Her gown shimmered, her smile rehearsed, her every gesture graceful in the way wealth teaches. People leaned into her laughter, eager to belong to her circle. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. I remembered another Lena one who curled up on our worn couch with tears on her cheeks because the rent was due and she didn't know how to make it stretch. I remembered her clutching my arm after her first heartbreak, whispering that I was the only person who made her feel safe. I remembered her sitting by Tom's hospital bed, swearing she would never forget the strength of family, never let go of what truly mattered, that Lena felt close enough to touch. Yet here she was, polished and untouchable, her hand resting on Ethan Hale's arm like it had always belonged there. The warmth in her eyes had cooled, replaced by something sharper in ambition I had never seen before. I wanted to believe she was still the same girl beneath the diamonds and champagne. But as I watched her glide through the crowd, I felt a chill. Tom had once warned me that Lena's heart might shift under the weight of money and status. I had dismissed it, convinced of her goodness. Now, seeing her so changed, I wondered if he had seen more clearly than I ever did. My hand trembled against the linen tablecloth as I reached into my purse. For months, I had carried Tom's letter, folded and sealed, its weight more than paper should ever hold. I had promised him I would use it only if Lena stripped me of dignity. Tonight, her words had cut so deep that silence felt like surrender. I rose. The chatter dulled, then stilled as I unfolded the paper. My voice wavered at first, then steadied, carrying across the grand hall. In that instant, I felt Tom beside me, his frail hand pressing mine, urging me on. His words filled the room like a ghostly echo, warnings of ambition unmoored from love, of a daughter who once whispered questions about inheritance at his bedside while her mother sat outside praying. He wrote of pride and sorrow, of fear that wealth might harden her heart. Each sentence rang with truth too raw to ignore. I could see faces shift shock, pity, judgment, while Lena's polished image cracked under the weight of his voice returning from beyond. My heart pounded, but I did not falter. For once, I chose dignity over silence. When I folded the letter, the room was frozen. Champagne glasses hung midair. No one breathed. I sat slowly, my hands shaking, my body light and heavy all at once. I knew then nothing about this night could return to what it was. The silence after Tom's words was heavier than any music that could have filled the hall. I could feel it pressing down, settling into the corners, clinging to every guest. Eyes darted toward me, toward Lena, then back down to their plates. No one dared break the stillness. Inside, I was trembling. My hands shook from the effort of speaking his truth aloud. Shame burned at the edges of my heart because it had come to this, because my daughter had driven me here. Yet beneath that raw sting, something stronger began to rise. Tom's words had not been a weapon of cruelty. They had been a shield. And tonight, for the first time, I understood what he had entrusted me with. I sat straighter. The tears that threatened never fell. Instead, I felt a steady calm take hold. Whatever came next, whispers, judgment, even my daughter's fury, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would never again allow myself to be spoken of as if I were nothing. In that vow, I felt my own worth return to me like breath after drowning, and with that quiet resolve, my eyes turned toward Silveridge, the place where masks were polished and secrets waited to be unearthed. After the wedding, I could not shake the way Lena and Ethan spoke of Silveridge, as if it were the natural next step for me. Their polished assurances rang hollow, like lines rehearsed. I knew enough about appearances to trust my doubts. So I began to dig. The library had always been my refuge, and now it became my war room. Stacks of state reports, licensing records, and regulatory filings spread before me. The first cracks appeared in the glossy image citations for understaffing, unresolved complaints, fines quietly paid. Online, the sheen unraveled further. Families wrote warnings hidden between the 5-star marketing blurbs loved ones left unattended. Bills padded with mysterious charges. Voices ignored until it was too late. Lawsuits whispered of neglect that never made the brochures. I read each account as though Tom himself had guided me to them, his warning echoing louder with every page turned. The Silver Ridge commercials played like promises of care. But all I could see now were traps, baited with chandeliers and fountains. What Lena had called concern revealed itself as control. A plan not to protect me, but to manage me, perhaps even profit from me. I closed the last report with my hands shaking, not from fear, but from fury. Tom had been right. The daughter we raised had allowed wealth to twist her, and Silveridge was the stage where she meant to place me out of sight. I would not go quietly. The restaurant was polished to perfection, linen napkins folded like origami, glasses catching the afternoon light, and a centerpiece that smelled faintly of roses. Lena and Ethan sat across from me, their smiles smooth, their voices pitched in a tone that might have sounded tender to anyone else. But I knew better. I could hear the rehearsal in their words, each phrase crafted to sound like concern. They spoke of my comfort, of ease, of how Silver Ridge would lift the burden from my shoulders. On the surface, it was honey. Underneath, I could taste the steel. I watched their eyes more than their mouths. Ethan's polite nods, Lena's tilted head, the faint crease at the corner of her smile that betrayed calculation. They circled the subject delicately, yet every turn of the conversation nudged me closer toward that facility. It was not an offer, it was a plan, dressed up as kindness. I nodded when expected, stirring my tea slowly, letting them believe their performance was working. Inside, I dissected every tactic, every careful word. I had lived too long, sacrificed too much, to miss what was truly happening. By the time dessert arrived, I knew exactly where they stood and where I must. I rose from that table, not with anger, but with clarity. Their mask of concern had cracked, and I had seen the machinery beneath. I left with my dignity intact, my silence sharper than any outburst. The real confrontation would not happen over lunch, it would come on my terms, in my own home. They came to my new home with the air of solemn duty, as if bearing news too important to be ignored. Lena's voice carried a practiced gravity. Ethan's hands rested on a neat stack of papers, brochures, contracts, and printed schedules. They sat across from me at my own kitchen table, the scent of my coffee still warm in the air, while their words painted Silver Ridge as salvation. But beneath their polish, I heard it, that faint tremor of condescension. The way Lena spoke to me as though I were fragile, incapable, already half gone. Ethan's assurances wrapped in financial logic, the careful phrasing of inevitability. It was not an offer, it was a verdict. I let them talk. I let them pour out their rehearsed concern, their insistence that this was for my own good. My hands stayed folded, my breath steady, and then quietly, deliberately, I placed my own folder on the table. Not glossy, not rehearsed, just truth. State reports of negligence, lawsuits buried under non-disclosure agreements, families writing warnings that their parents had gone into Silver Ridge and never come out whole again. The gleaming facade reduced to ash with every page I turned. Lena's eyes darted. Ethan shifted in his seat. Their mask cracked. And in that silence, I felt Tom beside me, his promise echoing through my veins. I spoke not with rage, but with clarity. I told them I knew exactly what Silver Ridge was, that their concern was not love, but control. That I would not be signed away, not by papers, not by manipulation, not even by my own child. The room held its breath. Their power dissolved in the weight of truth. For the first time in years, I stood not as someone's burden, but as myself whole, unshaken, and unafraid. The silence that followed was mine. Lena's voice broke first. It wasn't anger this time, but something smaller, more fragile. Her shoulders sagged, her face pale against the polished mask she had worn so tightly. I saw her eyes glisten, and when the first tear slipped down her cheek, the silence between us felt heavier than any accusation I could have spoken. For a long moment, I only felt the echo of my own fury, the sting of every wound she had dealt me. Years of sacrifice dismissed, love reduced to transactions. Part of me wanted to stay there, holding fast to my indignation, but another part, quieter, older, recognized something else behind her collapse. Fear, shame, a woman unraveling under the weight of her own choices. I thought of the little girl who once crawled into my lap after nightmares, whispering that she was scared I'd leave her. I thought of the teenager who cried in my arms after her first heartbreak. Those memories pressed against the harder truths, softening the edges of my anger. I didn't forgive her then. I wasn't ready, but I also didn't harden further. Instead, I allowed myself to feel both the fracture of betrayal and the faint pulse of compassion. Something shifted, not enough to heal us, but enough to open a door. Maybe, I thought, there is still a path forward if we both dare to walk it. A year later, my life feels like it has finally found its own rhythm. The mornings are quiet but full. Sunlight spilling across my kitchen table, where I sip coffee with no weight pressing me down. My little garden hums with color, and each blossom reminds me that I am still capable of growth, of tending to something with care, including myself. I live on my own terms now. Boundaries that once felt impossible to draw have become second nature, and with them came a surprising sense of freedom. My home is alive with laughter from friends, with books stacked by my chair, with music I choose just for me. Lena visits sometimes. The visits are different now, lighter, slower, touched with respect I once thought she had forgotten. She doesn't try to steer my choices anymore. Instead, she listens. There are still silences between us, still gaps we may never close, but there is warmth where before there was only strain. What I learned is simple family can break us, but it can also bloom again when love is reshaped by respect. In the end, my story is not only about betrayal or loss, it is about the strength that comes from standing firm in who we are. I learned that love without respect is fragile, but when boundaries are honored, love can grow strong again. Dignity is not selfishness. It is the soil from which true connection blooms. Many families carry wounds like mine, unspoken words and fractured trust. But healing begins when we choose self-respect. When we no longer trade our worth for approval, that choice opens the door for love to return in a healthier form. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to like, share, and leave a comment. Your reflections may inspire someone else to stand tall too.